Where do we think that they're going? What do we think the future of reward will look like? And then as to try to give the consultant their own medicine instead of just talking in big thinking and academic answers, how do we actually get there? What's the practical steps that we go through that a company might adopt to be able to get there? So if I carry on here, it is what we see happening broader in the market is that when we think about the future of work, we think about the current environment, we think about the global economy as it recovers from this horrible pandemic that we're slowly starting to emerge from, or I hope we're emerging from, is that a lot of companies are struggling with their traditional reward models. They just didn't quite work. And this is not, I don't even think this is related to the pandemic. I think this was happening for many years beforehand, where what businesses used to say, oh, we pay for performance, or we're an outcome-driven organization, we're a meritocracy. And it was nice words, but it didn't always play out to be true. And I think that as employees start to be more aware, as there's more job opportunities for them, the traditional styles of reward in terms of compensation frameworks, benefits, how we delivered these things, bonus was always one that is a big challenge, started to be questioned. So before I start talking about the future of reward, I'm gonna base it in a concept in Deloitte that we, for about 10 years or so, have talked about the future of work. And if you've worked with Deloitte before, you might have seen this model. But when we talk about the future of work, we talk about it with this triangle image. And for us, the future of work is based on three elements. It's work, workforce, and workplace. Work is probably the easiest to understand. What are we doing? What are the outcomes? What are the tasks necessary to do it? And to some degree, how could we automate or find clever ways to do the work that we're doing? Workforce, again, pretty easy to understand, that it is an element of who's doing the work. Is it an employee? Is it a contractor? Is it a robot? What is the jobs that we need? What are the human capabilities or the competencies we need in our workforce to be able to do the work? And workplace is the one that's a little bit more interesting in my head, at least, because this is the one that's changed the most over the pandemic. It used to be when we thought about workplaces, it was more the geographic location. Is the work done in Nigeria, or is it done in India? Or is it done in London? Where is it happening? But now we see organizations start to really think about the workplace as what is the purpose of it? If we have remote working, people can, this concept of work from anywhere, what is the purpose of the office or the factory or the location? It is something of the physical location of it, but there's something bigger than that. What is the culture that we're trying to create? What do we want people to do when they do come in together? When I think of the future of reward, it has to align to this element of this model here, these three triangles, this triangle with the three angles, because there's an element of, if we're going to, I'll use workplace here, if we're going to allow people to work from anywhere, do we pay geographic differentiators or differentials? Do we say, actually, because you can work from anywhere, I'm only going to pay this amount globally? Or you think about the work. Well, if I'm gonna ask you to come into work, what am I paying for in terms of that outcome? Is there something of the skill and I'm willing to pay more for that skill? What are you doing? In terms of the workforce, maybe I don't want to pay an employee. It's just too expensive because they want lots of benefits. There's lots of hassle and everything. Maybe I just want a contractor. And maybe that's how I'm going to pay. So you can see how the future of reward fits very nicely into this concept, because you have to consider all three angles when you start thinking about reward. If I carry on, so when we in Deloitte, we came up with this future of reward a couple years ago. And we came up with it because everyone was talking about the future of work and what was different. But we didn't understand the work might have been different, but how was reward different? And the reality was it wasn't. A lot of reward frameworks and concepts are about 40 or more years old. And if we're saying that everything has changed, but reward is still the same, is that good? Does it align? Does it drive what you want it to drive? So, like any good consultant, we started scratching our head and saying, well, what don't we like about it? And we came up with a massive long list. I got to tell you, it was when we used to be able to get together and use whiteboards. I mean, I think we took up a full whiteboard when we said all the things that we really thought were wrong with pay now, or reward now. And it tends to be the summary here on the left, that it's very narrowly defined. We have pay ranges that are very tight. One size fits all. We want to have one global framework. We don't want to acknowledge that maybe our people in IT should get different than people who are doing administrative work, or someone in marketing should make more than someone in HR. We don't like hearing that. We just want to say, here's the global framework, here's the pay range, and then we have to use that. We saw that there was a lot of misalignment with organizational goals. So we would hear things saying like, well, we're a pay for performance, or we drive for outcomes kind of concept. But in reality, what we saw was actually everyone's bonus and bonus targets were very similar. And everyone's pay rises were all 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever it was, 10%. And we were taking the peanut butter and we were spreading it thin across the whole organization. It was very opaque. There was always, reward was always secret. How much did you get for your bonus? What did you get? How much was your pay rise? What did your manager tell you? You know, it was always this very secretive and not helpful type of approach to reward. And I could go on and on. So then we started to say in Deloitte to say, well, what's the future? What would we want? What do we think employees want? And we started to come up with this list on the right. So this element of, and I won't go through each one, but that we wanted it to be transparent. We wanted it to be fair, because if we look at the Me Too movement, or we look at some other things going on in broader society, there is a big push for fairness around, I'm okay, you might make more than me, but I want to understand why. If you work harder, if you have better skills, I'm actually okay with that. If you are getting more than me simply because you're friends with the boss, no, I don't really like that. So transparency and fairness were some of the two biggest things we came up with. We recognized that it needed to be different. It couldn't be the same. If all we did is say, oh, we've launched some new pay ranges, or we've come up with a new philosophy where we're gonna go to median, or something like that, how is that really different? And we thought that the workforce would say, you know what, it's the same stuff. I don't believe you. We thought that there was a lot of investment in the workforce. So if two people are competing, two competitors, two different companies, and they both say, I'm going to pay at median, and they both use the exact same benchmarks, which is very, very common. Well, how do they differentiate themselves? What's different? And what we started to see is we thought, businesses who are being successful and doing this well are really starting to put investments in the workforce. A lot more on that side, but I'm keen to move on. But you can start to see how this was that the thinking was evolving. Interestingly, and I don't think it's not anywhere in the presentation, but let me share with you, is with a lot of the things or thinking that were coming out about the future of marketing, future of HR, future of work, that there was an element where they could throw caution to the wind and be extremely innovative and kind of come up with whatever they wanted to come up with. We did acknowledge there was some challenges with reward, society-wise. And what I mean by that is governments want taxes. And so there's not, for as much as we might come up with something completely innovative or different, the government wants their money. Mortgages, car payments, banks, education. There's certain things that need to happen on a regular basis. So we couldn't, when we started thinking about the future of reward, we did have some parameters that we knew we needed to work within. And it wasn't just, oh, we could do this and we could do spot pay and we could go crazy. It just, because society didn't necessarily allow that to happen. One other big thing that I haven't mentioned on this kind of parameter, which is really important, is also that how much would the employee be willing to take? Humans are conservative by nature. Are they willing to allow their pay to be 1 month 10,000 and the next month 2,000, and then in the third month 50,000? By nature, humans don't really like that lack of being able to control or see what's coming. So again, it was a different parameter we came up with. If I move on, so what do we in Deloitte think the future of reward will look like? So because of these parameters I just came up with, or I just shared with you, we think the future of reward is kind of broken down into two different, what we would call areas, categories. Those categories are market rewards and motivator rewards. What we found when we looked at the market, when we interviewed clients, when we looked at high-performing organizations, that there was an element of something that there's just some basic things, some housekeeping, if you will, that needs to happen to get the employee in the door. We call these market rewards. So you can see that if you know the term table stakes, it's kind of the basic, the entry for the ticket price to get into the party. And what we found is that those elements are not sexy. They don't really drive performance. They don't motivate people. They don't, workers aren't hugely excited about them. It just is what you need to do. It is in this area, this is where we might put base salary, any kind of benefits or something like that. Because the reality is, if you go back to my example I gave a few moments ago, if two organizations are competing for the same person and they use the same pay benchmarks, they're going to give an offer that is broadly the same. And what we do, if you look at any kind of employee survey or any kind of data that looks at what worker preferences are, that you'll find that this element of these elements of pay are not very high up on the list. So that's why we said they're table stakes. It's the basic thing you need to do to employ human beings to do a job. Then we said, well, who are those that actually are differentiating? Who are those companies that are doing something really innovative and are winning in the talent space? And we define that as the motivator rewards. And these are the things that we think when companies want to be different, want to win, want to really adapt the future of reward in this case, that's where they're going to play. So let me go into a little bit more detail on the motivator rewards. We started to think, okay, what are those things that do motivate people? And we came up with a whole massive list. And then we said, okay, let's look at that, take a little step back, squint your eyes, and what are the categories that we think that kind of falls within? And we came up with these 4 categories: talent investments, well-being drivers, cultural carriers, and impact accelerators. And I'll take a moment, I'm going to go through them because this, in Deloitte's opinion, truly is the future of reward. These areas are the things that we think when we did market research, when we looked at high-performing organizations, when we looked at those that we thought had differentiating reward or employee offerings, if you will. These are the things that when they looked at their employee engagement surveys, when they did exit interviews, whatever the case may be, these were the things that they were pointing to say, this is why we're different and this is why we're winning. If you look here, interestingly, compensation is not listed, and that's on purpose. No one is ever going to say, I don't want a pay rise. No one is ever going to say, you don't have to pay me, I love working here. That's not realistic, but for us, that's that market reward piece. These are the things that especially in the post-pandemic world, as labor shortages are coming up again and again in economies around the world, as the talent, people don't want to stick with a job for life, that they want to move around. These are the things that we think that people go for. So let me take a moment and describe these in more detail, because this is where, in Deloitte's opinion, the magic lies. I'm going to be a little bit weird, and I'm going to start from the right. So well-being drivers. Well-being drivers, and this really came to fruition during the pandemic and lockdowns around the world. Well-being drivers are those things where companies invest in their people to ensure that they're okay. So there's a little bit of, yes, it's some benefits or something like that, maybe some mental health support, these kind of programs that are offered. Yes, and these are things more like flexible working, where actually, you know what, it's healthier for you to stay at home or not to face the commute or not to come in the office every single day. That we know is good for your well-being. We also know that by providing flexibility to people, we also know that it is going to it's going to enable you to be a better worker. You're going to be more productive. The cultural carriers is one that's becoming really, really big these days. And this is where I would put the concept of purpose. We know a lot of millennials, a lot of younger people, well, not even just younger people, but a lot of employees are saying, well, why do I work here? What is the company trying to do? And this kind of cultural carriers where we would put, this element of purpose we would put in cultural carriers. I'll give you some examples here. So it might be that because as an organization, we're really keen on ESG. So this is very big with shareholders, environmental, social, and governance metrics that would go into long-term incentives, but also we see in other areas of pay as well. So so we might be something related to carbon neutrality, or in the oil industry that we're going to go for green energy or something along those lines. So what are the things we put in the package that allow people to connect to that concept? Because that's the purpose of the organization, and we know that motivates people. It might be something like, we're going to give you time to do volunteer days. We're going to allow you to have 3 days a year to go do whatever you want in society, because that's really important to you, but it's connected to our purpose. It might be things around the office. If we're going for carbon neutrality, what are we doing with the type of paper we use, or recycling, or something along those lines? So we see these starting to say, again, I've already said this, but I can't emphasize it enough, is it's not a pay thing, but rather it's the thing that makes me want to work harder for you because it aligns with my own human purpose. The talent investments is one that we've seen absolutely skyrocketing over the last couple of years. Talent investments are what do we do to grow people's skills? What do we do to allow people to learn more, to be better, to be a more efficient worker, to do things they want to do? So this is where we might see mobility options. And I don't necessarily mean expatriate assignments. Yes, that could be part of it. But maybe it's something where you're in HR and actually we're going to give you the opportunity to go work in finance or in marketing because it's a personal interest of you. It's a stretch, but you know the culture of the business, you know you have a massive network. Why wouldn't we let you do that? It might be something where I say, actually, instead of giving you more pay this year because budgets are tight and I just don't have it, what about if we do something where you go to some conference or we do some kind of special training or whatever? These elements of this talent, where organizations say to their people, I'm investing in you, you're important to me, I want you to grow, I want you to develop. That this, we know, is a massive motivator for people. And where, again, using our research and the analytics we did to come up with this kind of concept, it's where we notice, I'll give the example of saying, I'm not going to go to the competitor, even though they're willing to pay me more, because you're investing in me, or I have a future here, I have a career path. The last one on the left, the Impact Accelerators, these are things that organizations do to reinforce a behavior or a value. This is where we see recognition sitting. And again, we see this happening. This is the fourth kind of pillar I'm talking about here, and it's the first time I'm going to really talk about pay. This is where we use money or something else to really reinforce and push the performance in the direction in which we want. So as opposed to waiting for something like an annual bonus or an annual pay increase or something like that, what can I do here and now to reinforce what you've done as a worker and to say, I want more of it. Well done. Great job. And that's why I say recognition fits in here. It might be money, it might be something else. It might be calling someone out in front of the team to say, they did a fantastic job. I'm really, really impressed. It might be something around just feedback. I'm investing in my people and I'm going to talk to them because I know that creates an impact. I'm going to acknowledge what they've done because the outcome of what they were able to achieve is the reward, and I'm going to let them know how pleased I am with it. These four different categories is where we would really see the future of reward going. Not pay, not some element of technology. Of course, that's all part of that, but we would just put that as part of the natural evolution of compensation and benefits. These four is where Deloitte believes the real change is coming or is already happening. And these four are the areas that when we look at those businesses who are most successful, that they are focusing on these things. To give you some examples of when, it was quite interesting when we first put together this concept and we started doing our research, we tested it with a couple clients, and there was one of them that we tested it with was with Mars, the chocolate, the snack company. And as I was kind of going through it and saying, how does it, what do you think? And the woman I was showing it to, her face just kind of was almost frozen. And she said, this is exactly where we're going. And it was a top secret thing. But at that point, they were going through a restructure and they had changed the individual who was the global head of reward was going to become the global head of reward, talent, and leadership. Because in Mars, they saw these things blending together. And the more that they were structured in silos in HR and saying, oh, I'm comp and bens, I'm learning and development, I'm whatever, the more they kind of kept that traditional mentality, that they knew they were going to lose their key talent. And that's not, they were making a proactive change to say, if we can blend it together into this concept, then we know we're going to win. So how the heck do you do it? It's very nice. Consultants are very nice with pretty slides and some nice messages and a bit of storytelling. But how do you actually make it happen? So I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's not easy. And the reason why I say that is because if I look across the HR professional landscape, people are protective. And people are thinking, wait a minute, this is my turf. Learning and development is my turf. It's not reward. Performance management sits in talent. It has nothing to do with reward. And the more we have those barriers in place, then the more the worker loses out and more ultimately the business loses out. And I say that because sometimes we're protectionists. I think that's part of HR's role as guardian of businesses and making sure people are, there's an inclusive environment and we're trying to do what's best for people and we want to minimize risk for the business. But in doing so, we kind of stick with our little silo and say, no, this is my job. So how do you actually start to pivot then and change to this future? So one is working with the team and working with the HR team and saying, listen, this is not about taking away your power. This is not about eroding what you've done and the successes you've been able to achieve. This is about us working together, because if you ask an employee, what do they think about learning or pay or whatever? they don't really differentiate. It's just HR and the service that they're given. So if we put on the employee lens and the employee experience, we might start to make this a little bit easier. The other thing about introducing this, what I would say is usually when HR, when I've done these kind of transformational projects where we rethink about what is the purpose of reward, what are we going, what is the pay philosophy, etc., that the business is the one that is pushing for the change much faster than HR. That oftentimes the business is like, yes, 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 I get it. Yes, this is what I want. This is what I want. This is how I want to motivate my people. I want a toolkit of things. It's not just pay and recognition. I want a lot of different things. And so tapping into that energy and that enthusiasm for change, I think is critical to this happening. The way that we've spelled this out here is that we're saying, well, if we know the future looks at the stuff at the right, what does HR, what do we need to do at the bottom? The other thing, and I'll just give a couple examples here, but the other thing as we start to look at some of this is how much, what is the big change, and actually how do we keep people at the center of all this? So if I look at the second one here, rewards as part of a human-centered employee value proposition, I would say of all of them, this is one of the most key things. What do our employees want? How do we motivate them? And what we will do is we'll start to get away, or organizations start to get away from the nice to haves. I would love to pay you more money, but actually, is that really, if you left on Friday making 30 million and you came back on Monday and you made 40 million, are you going to work any harder? Are you going to do something different? I'm not sure you would. And we see this, especially when organizations go through org design or transformation activities. People get restructured, the OD, the boxes and the wires change, and who reports to who, and spans and layers. But the reality is the job is pretty similar. So is throwing a bunch of cash at people really the answer? I would suggest probably not. It would be nice. Of course, I'd love to take another holiday. Of course, I'd love to pay off a little debt, or of course, I'd love to put a little money extra aside for the future. But actually, you know what I really, really want is I want to talk to my manager. I want my manager to be honest with me. I want to know what my future is. I want to know how I grow. Another key one here that I think is critical when we do these type of transformations is, how do we recognize a worker? So again, traditional leaders, and I'll be even mean and say traditional male leaders say, throw some money at it. Throw some money at the problem, it will fix it. They're going to work really, really hard. And that's just, we don't see any evidence of that. If I use the example of retention payments, you might lock in, someone's going to leave and you say, oh, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. We're going to give you 50% of your bonus if you stay for another year, or 50% of your base if you stay for another year. Very, very typical action. But what we see statistically is the person still leaves. Maybe they don't leave in the next year, but they're going to leave soon after that. So that recognition, and how do I actually say, instead of throwing some money at the problem, how do I recognize what's going on? And how do I make sure someone is happy and healthy and developing and growing and gaining skills and And that is where we see profit increasing in organizations, specifically EBITDA increases, because I'm getting more productivity for the same amount of investment, simply because I focused on what the employee wanted and I recognized them. Again, there's a lot of things on here, and maybe during the fireside chat, if there's questions, I'm more than happy to pick up something here. So what does it actually look like in practice? So we've talked a little bit of where we think it's going, some concepts and some ideas of how you build that strategy and how you get there. So what does it mean in practice? Show me the money. What do we see happening? And this slide here is a very, very new concept that more and more organizations are starting to either think about or are already moving towards. Let me explain it first, and then I'll give you some examples of what we see happening in the market. So in traditional reward, you'd have your salary. There might be some benefits or something else. You get a bonus once a year, and for some elite individuals or at the top of the house, there might be some long-term incentive. Total amount, 49 million. What we see happening with this focus on the market and the broader world around skills, we see this element happening to say, actually, your skills could increase. We have two people doing the same job, but one of them has a different skill set. Therefore, that person is worth more money to me. So how do I differentiate them? What happens? So you see this idea starting to happen. This is in the tech industry is where we're first seeing it happen, but I will give some examples of where we're seeing other organizations do it. There's a base salary, a core salary is what we've called it within Deloitte. And in this money, we say, you know what, there's minimum wage, legal requirements. It's what I pay you to show up to work every day. Then there's the element of skills. And how do I start to break down the work you do, the skills you have, and how it helps the business achieve an outcome? So if you look over here on the far right, it's kind of where we break down this 24 million. So we might say for this kind of coder person that Python is a really important skill, and I'm willing to pay a bunch of money for SQL. Machine learning, hugely critical skill. Can't keep that talent in the business. So these things, we break down this and we say that's your skills salary. So we have a core salary, skill salary. Then we still have these other things. We're not changing them. Still the same. There's a cash bonus, long-term incentive, still the same. So ultimately, we're saying in this example, the money might be the same, but the way we talk to people about it and the way we break it down is different. I would say, think of this more, the skill salary concept is more like Lego blocks. What are the pieces that click together to say that's the job and that's what I want to pay for it? It's a really, really interesting concept. It's relatively new. And there's some challenges with it. And I want to be very clear on those challenges. One is, how do I determine what is the value of that skill? And this is difficult. So in my little example here, we said Python was worth 6 million and SQL was worth 4 million. Well, where do we get that from? And Deloitte is not aware of any market benchmark that has been able to produce that level of granularity yet. But we know 2, 3, 4 different organizations where most pay benchmarking comes from are working on this because they're getting huge amounts of pressure from the market saying, we want this. How much should we pay for Python? How much should we pay for SQL? What's the difference? And this is challenging because not that I'm a pay benchmark, coder person or whatever, analyst, but this is where we get into the, well, how much of it is I, the beholder, I think it's worth this much versus this is actually what we see, the differentiations in the market for this skill. And it's difficult, but they are definitely moving towards this. The other concept that I want to float with this new idea that a lot of businesses are starting to talk about and ask about and starting to plan for is skill. Traditionally, pay only goes one direction, up, 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 up. With skills, what happens if a skill becomes redundant and it's just not there anymore, or we don't need it? So again, in my example here, what happens if Python is not the coder language that people use anymore? It's HTML, or it's some, well, HTML is old too, but maybe it's called Mountain, or who knows what the next coding language would be. So does that mean that actually pay can go this way because I'm acquiring skills? Those skills are valuable, up, 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 but they can also go down, 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 down. And that is because if we're breaking it down and saying your pay is related to your skill and the value of that skill to the business, it goes both ways. And most humans, the way workers have traditionally thought about, don't consider that. They only expect it to go up. However, we are seeing, especially with the younger generation, that there is an acknowledgement, well, maybe I'm going to take a little time because I want to build up my machine learning. And so maybe I'm going to do the job and I don't have that skill. My skill is redundant, so my pay might go down for a little bit because I'm investing in myself. But then the expectation is then it skyrockets. So although I said those two challenges exist, I would suggest that they are going to be overcome relatively soon, and we're going to see this concept more and more in the market. I got asked as we were preparing for this, where have we seen it? So Deloitte did it with Facebook as ones that are looking at this. We are doing it with a grocery store and with a global furniture retail company right now as well. So it is not; these are not small companies. They're also, when I show this slide or when I talk to organizations about this, the other question that comes up is, do we do this for the whole organization? And I would say, because if you think about, say, a receptionist at the front desk, could his or her skills go up or down? Maybe, maybe not. Not sure about that. Or someone in a manufacturing environment. Nope. You know what I need them to do is I need them to go with the machine. And that's what I'm willing to pay them for. So we see this kind of concept of saying, instead of it going back to one of the first things I said in reward frameworks, one size fits all, rather that we're starting to go through and say, actually, one size doesn't fit all. And what we do for, say, IT is very different than what we do for manufacturing or for administration or for marketing. And so what we see is that almost kind of mini reward frameworks, if you will, are starting to appear. There's still the group concept, and there's cultural and specific company skills that we're still looking for in every job, but the pay might be different by function or by area. So I think this is the last slide that I have prepared, but just so again, so where's it happening? Where does Deloitte see really interesting things happen? So the 6 examples here are all publicly available. So it's not, Deloitte may or may not have done the development, but I'm gonna add a little bit more of where do we see really innovative reward things happening. Interestingly, one of the biggest areas where we see it happening is, well, probably 2 industries. One is in technology, and that's because everyone in the whole world seems to be competing against Amazon, Google, and Facebook. And so everyone is looking for innovative ways to reward and acknowledge people to be able to get that talent that they need. So that's one industry where we just see some really interesting things happening, lots of experimentation. We're going to try this. It may or may not work, but we're going to give it a go. And then the other area where we're seeing it more and more happening, which I'm a little bit surprised by, but is in retail. And the reason I think for retail where we see some innovative things happening is because one is, I think, this global labor shortage that is facing, or a lot of organizations are facing. But also for retail, they tended to be very short jobs. You might work in them for a year or 2 and then you move on. It was a very young workforce. And as retail changes, as people are not necessarily going into shops anymore, that they're buying online or through delivery, whatever the case may be, that as we see that happening more and more, retail is saying like, oh my gosh, we got to, the thing that we've been doing for the last 20 years isn't working. Why is it not working? And so we start to see some more innovation or change happening in that industry as people really start to say, well, what is it? What's the next thing? The last thing I'm going to say on this before we move on here is there is an element within the there's an element with this where it's not really an HR issue. It is and it isn't. And what I mean by that is, this is where, again, we're seeing a little bit of differences. It is a line manager / business issue. HR is the facilitator of any change in this direction. HR holds the structure, might hold the pen as we do the strategy or the change. However, if the business doesn't do it, it doesn't work. If we go back to some of the things we said about the cultural carriers or the other types of motivators, it's the line manager who's facing off to the employee. The line manager that's going to get that extra discretion or the higher productivity. So if companies say, HR problem, not my problem, HR problem, they're going to fail. because it's not an HR problem. HR is not with that person, that worker every day in and out. The HR is not managing that individual. HR is not motivating that individual. HR comes up with the framework and the structure, and then the business or the line manager, whatever you want to say, that's the one where the magic happens. So we see in this kind of transformation, we also see a lot of organizations focusing on manager capability, as well as identifying who is a manager. Whereas we used to say, well, I was the longest person in the job, I became the manager. Well, yes, but if you don't have the people skills, if you're not focused on getting more out of the workforce, it's probably not the job for you. And so again, we see a little bit of separation where the way I'm going to gain more money isn't by going up and becoming a people manager. It's going to be gaining those skills. I'm going to grow and I'm going to improve the outputs. So it's a super interesting area in the market. It is changing quickly. More and more organizations are starting to ask. I have to say, when I started my career, or even say 5 years ago, Deloitte might get 1 or 2 reward strategy. What's our future? What's our model? What's our framework? Requests for support a year, one, 2, something like that. Now we get, I don't know, 3 a month, something like that. There's such a focus in as organizations recognize this is really important. We're not winning in the talent space. We pay really, really well, but we can't get the people, or they're leaving us. And so organizations are saying, Joseph, I don't know if you want to do the poll first or you want to go.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. So maybe you can put down your screen at this point so that we can put up the screen and take the polls. Thank you so much. We'll attend to the questions at the end, but we'll take a quick poll and then we'll have the fireside chat. All the questions in the Q&A, we're incorporating them so that you can be part of the fireside chat as well. So for now, I want us to go to this link, www.mentee.com, and type in this code. We'll be responding to a question on the link. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code to participate. So please go to www.mentee.com and type in this code, or scan the QR code. Let's just leave the screen for a few more seconds, and then we'll see what the responses are. Okay, the responses are coming in. So please send in your response. Go to www.mentee.com and use the code. Type in the code 54667309 and respond to the question. So it's a yes or no. Your current reward strategy, does it drive the following? Does it drive business strategy? Yes or no? Core talent retention, skills development, as well as employee motivation. So we need you to respond either yes or no. Thanks to those that have responded so far.
It is interesting that in terms of does it drive business strategy, you would think the answer has to be, of course it does. But the fact that there's some hesitation, I think, is actually telling you know, to say, how do we align? And this is the question businesses are asking us, how do we align pay or reward to what we want to achieve?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, we'll take a few more seconds and then we'll move to the fireside chat.
And let's allow a few, maybe a couple of minutes to just run through this.
Let's keep them coming in. For those that are just joining us, we're currently having a pool right now. Please go to the link on the screen, www.mentee.com, and type in this code to respond to the question. So for each of these options, we want you to reply yes or no.
The other one that I find very, very interesting is the employee motivation. If your reward is not motivating your people, why are you doing it? You know, it's quite revealing. And I think part of it's interesting when I think of different clients of what we've done this kind of exercise with or these projects with, that because pay is so sensitive, finance has an opinion on it, the CEO has an opinion on it, and anyone has an opinion on it. And there's a lot of fear of, oh my gosh, this is a really big change, I don't think we can do it. Or I often hear, we're going to do that next year. It's in next year's box, because it's just such a big consideration. That it's interesting that as HR professionals, we're calling out that actually it's not motivating our people, but yet my follow-up question would be then, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix it?
Someone just dropped a funny chat saying, we don't have a reward strategy. So where do we stand?
You're not alone. You're not alone. It's I'm doing a process right now with a global Dutch financial services company, and they are. We asked them, they want to redo it. That's what the request was for support. We want to redo it, and we said, okay, great. Can we see what you have now so we can understand? And they said, oh, we have nothing. And this is where some organizations, because either the local leader said, no, I know what's going on, I know what's best, I know what to do, or that there was always a fear that the more I put constraints or a framework in place, that it didn't allow the business to have the freedom they want. This is kind of the typical HR versus the business kind of fight that we see in some organizations.
Yeah, so to your point, Andrew, I mean, also done some work locally, and can tell you that you've had instances where we ask organization, what is your reward strategy? Recording in So reward, it's not just about, carrying out a survey, what is my, or what are competitors paying, or what's my competitor paying. It's a lot, broader than that. It's something that has to be from a holistic perspective. Start with your own strategy in terms of how you want to deal with reward. So you're very correct. So Adebayo, you're not left. You're not the only one in there. I mean, there are a couple of organizations today that still do not have a reward strategy.
Let's leave this on for a few more seconds, maybe 1 more minute, and then we go straight to the fireside chat. So please send in your responses if you're yet to. Still quite a number of us that are on the call that are yet to respond.
Did you used to be a teacher?
I still am. So I can see a couple of raised hands. If you have a comment, please send it on the chat box and use the Q&A as I mentioned earlier for your questions. Okay, 1 more minute and then we proceed. The link is on top of the screen, mentee.com. If you're just joining us, you're welcome. We're having a poll. Just type in this code and respond either yes or no to the question on the screen.
There's some very good questions being put into the Q&A too that
Yes, I can
we'll
see.
definitely try to answer because some of them are quite challenging. I'm glad I get to see it before before it gets asked out loud, because I'm like, shh, my brain is thinking.
I think we've gotten enough responses at this point, so we'll just go straight to the fire. So thank you very much for your responses. We'll do this again and a different question. But at this point, we want to respond to some of the questions that you've sent to us. I have a set of questions, so I'll be putting Andrew as well as Joseph on the hot seat so they can respond. Please keep sending the questions. So the first thing, Andrew, is what's the future of reward in 2022? What will reward look like in specific terms?
So I'm gonna, because you put a year on that, I'm gonna talk very near term. So I think that the biggest thing I see happening in the market is related to what is the connection or what is the association between hybrid working and reward. And this is what companies need to answer pretty darn fast because lots of employees are asking the question. So that's why I'm quite happy you put 2022 in there. So let me explain what I mean. In some countries or some areas, there is geographic differentiators. So the easiest example I can give is if you work in San Francisco versus that you work in Johannesburg, that the pay is very, very different because of market forces, because of local pressures, etc. If you are doing the same job and you're 100% remote, or you might go in the office once a week or something like that, why would I pay you different? how is that fair that the person in San Francisco makes significantly more than the person in Lagos? That's just not fair if they're doing the same job. They might work in the same function. They might even have the same boss because of the way that the global matrix works. This question is coming up a lot. And so companies are starting to scratch their head to say, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. The only organization that I've seen that has come up with a definitive answer on it is Spotify. And Spotify has made publicly known that they will not change anyone's pay based on where they're living. The other angle to this is it gets very, very messy from a tax perspective. Because, and I'm not a tax person by any means, but if you're going to allow someone to get, I'll use my same example, you're going to allow them to take a San Francisco salary, but they're going to be based in Cairo. How is that fair? And who pays the right tax? What's the right thing? And that gets really, really messy from a tax and legal perspective. And we do see organizations starting to say, well, you have to be based in a jurisdiction where we have a business license, or you have to be within a short distance of the office or something. You see some of these policies starting to emerge. So I think to answer your question, I think in 2022, we will see some of these policies starting to solidify with a specific answer of this is what we're going to do for our business, if they haven't already done it. The second thing on the back of the pandemic that I see with a lot of and this is pure compensation, is, and will happen in 2022, is what do we do if someone is hybrid working? What do we offer them? Do we give them a desk? Do we give them an allowance for their internet? Do we give them allowance for electricity or heating or something, depending on what country they live in? Is that fair? Because if they came into the office, we would be covering that cost anyway. And again, the response to this is that it's in flux, but I think in 2022, we will start to see this kind of solidify, because it will start to become a noisy question that companies will just want to fix and come up with a policy or a straightforward procedure to say, this is what our approach is. So I think those two things, very, very much related to the pandemic, ultimately, that we'll see in 2022 becoming big conversations.
All right, thank you, Andrew. I have a question for you that relates to compensation philosophy, how compensation philosophy fits into our future-focused reward strategy. But before we come to that, I have a question for Joseph. What do you think are the limitations to the implementation of a future-proof reward strategy? Joseph, this is for you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Angelica. I think the starting point really is, I'll say it's more of back to what Andrew had said earlier. Let's talk about, the fact that, do we even understand this? And I don't mean to be negative about this. It's just basically saying, from, so those of us in HR may understand, but, again, what about the people in the other areas of the business? And like, Andrew did mention earlier as well, and which is applicable to all, HR, elements. So HR, we are the facilitators. I mean, the real people who should implement actually the business leaders. And if I think through some of the conversations we've had with organizations today, I've seen a lot of CFOs talking about, what do we do about our reward? I mean, I've heard CFOs say, I've engaged my HR people, they're not coming through in terms of what should be done. So I think the first thing is that of understanding that needs to clearly be, I mean, we need to understand that the future has changed and we need to deal with that change mindset. So that for me is the first thing. Now, the second thing is in terms of being able to have the right tool to get this done. So the fact that you're going to have different, models, just like, Andrew had talked about. So if this is going to be personalized, or it's going to be based on people's preferences, then you're not going to just have one size fits all. If you don't have one size fits all, there might be some administrative, challenges on the back of that. So you need to be able to have, tools to drive that. And also you need to be able to have the right data. to be able to do this. So these are going to be potential challenges. Now, the other challenge, of course, we need to then deal with is in terms of, I mean, for a lot of CFOs and business leaders, we want to think through what does this mean for us in terms of impact, right? Impact from a cash flow perspective. Again, in as much as we move into the new ways, new ways of doing things, we also go to, there's that, mindset of still saying, at the end of the day, this boils down to, what impact will have on my business. So again, that's going to be another, challenge. But the good thing about this challenge or limitations are things that we can deal with. The fourth one, so with respect to the cash flow impact, that's more of like financial modeling, which of course we need to then think through. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now the other part, potential challenges will be, and I think someone already raised that concern in terms of where we are unionized. How do we deal with such things? Right. Again, and that takes me back to the first, question. First answer in terms of knowledge, understanding, and it's not just union. It's also in terms of, our board members, our entire management. Do board members even understand this? Do they even get to understand the fact that things are, they do know things have changed, and I know a lot of boards today are going through what does future of work mean for us. The same way we are dealing with ESG, for instance, and the same way we're going to also start dealing with this. So there's going to be a lot around, educating people. They're not going to just buy into it almost immediately. We need to do a lot of, there's going to be a lot of change on the back of this. But the one thing that will help us to drive, this change will be the fact that, we need to have the right data. We need to have the right statistics. We need to show, that this is exactly what is happening, and this is the way things will have to go. So from a union perspective, yes, there's some elements that you need to negotiate, do understand, but I think the question will remain, which one takes preference over the other, right? Which one comes first? Is it about keeping our people, getting more productive, and then of course being able to return and in fact actually reward the employees more, right? Or just basically being fixated in terms of it must be this way, is either this way or it's not, or not. I think, so what that means really is, again, without repeating myself, is there's a lot of engagement that will need to happen to show even at the board level, at union level, that, this is good for our business. This is the way the world is going. It's not something that is, do we have the choice? I don't think we have the choice anymore. Unlike just like someone said, are we going to go back to the same, way we used to work some 3 years ago, 4 years ago? It will be a challenge, to be honest. It's something that, we need to then realize that it's come to stay, and therefore to think about. So there's the issue around, also issue of tax, tax implications. I'll just talk a bit. Interestingly, somehow my path, in my previous lives is also, I've done a bit of tax, but I think, but I don't want to speak so much about tax. I won't call myself a tax guru, but I would, from a tax perspective, I think one thing that you start thinking about is, what does this mean? Is it a double taxation issue? Should I be taxed? Especially if not, if you look at it from the new ways of working, really, and then people are working just like Andrew said. You're in UK. You're working for a company in Nigeria. Do you get your pay split into two, and so on? I'll just leave that for now. Reason being that we have a major session also coming up very soon on workforce mobility and talking about the tax implications. Right. If one of my partner, my directors, is on this particular session, I'm sure she'll provide a bit more context around that. But I think I would advise that we look forward to that particular program. We're going to be, actually, deep diving on that particular matter. So I think I'll stop at this point. Happy to speak a bit more in terms of those challenges or limitations. But the good thing is that they are all surmountable. They're not insurmountable. That's what I say. Will it take time? The answer is yes. Do we need to plan towards it? The answer is yes. I don't know if Andrew has additional comments on that.
The only build I might put on what you just said there was, There's an element in there about how does a reward or compensation philosophy play out, and especially when you talked about some of the things, Joseph, that you said, where you're differentiating or you have different types of workforces, union, whatever. And what I would say is that the most successful reward strategies I've worked with or seen don't go down to a level of detail that you can't stay true. And what I mean by that is, years ago, I used to see ones that would say, like, our philosophy is to pay at the 50th percentile. And that, the more you put that kind of constraint from a strategy side, then you're kind of screwed as a business. You know, you don't want to do that. What you would, a successful reward philosophy might say something like, we will reward those that deliver our performance and exit those that don't. You know, so we're not worried about the percentages of this, that, and the other thing that might change year on year or might be different by business, but rather what we're saying is our philosophy is that those that are the best performers are going to get the best money or the best outcome, and those that aren't, maybe they're not right for this place. That kind of example statement is one of the, for me, it was one of the best ones I saw, because it was so clear and everyone understood what it meant and everyone understood how to action it. And it also allowed the flexibility to say, in marketing, we might do this, in sales, we might do that, but in the manufacturing environment, we might do a third thing. But the reality was those that performed got the money. Clear, super, super clear.
So, sorry, Andrew, just to add to that, NJ, I mean, again, just thinking through from some of the sessions we've had. So, and that speaks to the issue around, you know, the board members. So what I've found out, and I'm being very practical here, what I've found out that most times when we do compensation work is the fact that there's a lot of pushback that comes from the board members. And it's because, you know, really all we kind of share with them, it's what is the pay for people, or what will people be getting. I think we need to stretch this, you know, in terms of what exactly does this mean for the organization, right? You know, and that's the beauty of HR, you know, going forward. And that's also the future of HR, you know, working with data, being able to show the path, you know, to the money. And I think that's important, being able to show the value that will be created for the owners of the business if we did X, Y, Z. And I think that's also quite, you know, will be quite, you know, instructive in terms of how we do things going forward. If you're able to show that path to the money, if you're able to show the board members the fact that, you know, this will help us to create additional value as we drive our business, I think you can have a more convincing conversation, right? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Joseph. I think you both have actually responded to two other questions I would have asked in relation to tax and then the unions. So let's talk about compensation philosophy, Andrew. What's the correlation with this talk around future of reward?
So it's similar to what I just said. So the one is, it's got to be updated. And when I say updated, is back to, I think someone put in the chat, like, we don't even have one. Well, write one. You know, like basic, you know, like let's put one together. So but the traditional compensation philosophies were very detailed and very specific, because it allowed those practitioners in HR to be able to do their job, and or so people thought. So you would see things like one that I remember is we will pay, our pay will be at the 50th percentile, and our variable pay will bring us into the upper quartile for total TCC, total compensation. And when I first read that, I was like, oh yeah, that's good. I mean, this is 10 years ago or something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, it's quite good. It's very clear. I know exactly what to do. Because as a reward practitioner, I knew, like, I needed to get the pay benchmark. I need to do this. But again, that's an HR thing. It's not what's good for the employees. So if modern compensation philosophies or good compensation philosophies, I would say, have a different flavor to them. One is, it's not just about compensation. It is the broader reward thing. Second, it gives that kind of guardrails or the parameters in which you operate, but not the details. that is a different thing. And those details might change year on year. So for example, I've done quite a lot of work with Astrazeneca, the global pharma that's in the news all the time because of the COVID vaccine. But AstraZeneca, in their philosophy, it's there's some stuff in there, but the way they're building out the detail is it's only on a 2 or 3 year horizon because they know it might change. And it's more about how do we go to personal choice? How do we go to more flexibility? How do we create the framework that will enable us to do it? So instead of coming up with a compensation philosophy that usually has to be signed off by the board, they have this kind of overarching one, and then they have their rewards journey map, if you will, which says this is what we're going to do, or this is how we're going to interpret that philosophy year on year. So it gives HR what they need from an operational perspective, but it is very clear from an employee value proposition or a talent acquisition perspective, where it's very clear what they're willing to pay for and what they're not willing to pay for. The other two other thoughts. One is that often reward strategies cover a very broad thing, and I think that's good. It might not go into the detail to say we're going to give housing benefit or we're going to give recognition or whatever. It doesn't go down to that level of detail necessarily, and I don't think it should. But rather it will say something like, another common one I've seen is compensation is only one component of our reward offering. And so it's very clear that it's not just the pay, there's other things out there. And so for talent acquisition, as an example, as they're talking about the business and trying to sell something to a candidate, they have that kind of speech, or they have that script, so that they say, actually, for us, for company ABC, our reward philosophy is, yep, we pay, but we also do skills growth and training and blah, 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 and benefits and cars or whatever else that you might do. And so you find that balance. The last thing I'll say about a philosophy, and I find this really, really interesting. I'm working with a global toy manufacturer with their venture. They have a corporate venture arm. And their business strategy is not super clear. They kind of have an idea of they want to be 10%, they want to grow, and that, something like that, but it's not super clear. And they were trying to use the reward philosophy and the reward approach to define the business strategy. And it just made my shoulders go like this. And I thought, oh my God, no, it's the wrong way around. And the way that we saw it playing out in reality was when we said, okay, what kind of metrics do you want to build into this, whatever plan we were building with them? And they're like, well, it's different by person because this person might be focused on growth, this person might be focused on M&A, this person might be focused on developing the business, improving the asset, They were all over the place. And we're like, you can't do that. That should be your business strategy that says how you're going to grow or what you're going to focus on. Don't use pay to define the business strategy. It should be the other way around.
Sure. I got that. Don't use pay to define the business strategy. Let it be the other way around. Thank you very much, Andrew. So we'll go to the next question. I know you talked a bit about how the pandemic affected reward, or affected us in general. So let's be more specific. In statistical terms or any other example you can give us, how did the pandemic, in your opinion, affect reward?
So one statistical analysis, one is that loads of companies focused on that pillar of the well-being that I talked about, the well-being drivers.
Yeah.
Whereas businesses recognize our people are hurting. They're scared. They're at home. They hate their spouse. They hate their kids. They're tired of staring at the wall. They're stressed out because the internet isn't working. They are, all these things are happening. And I think a lot of businesses, I think it was I hope it's a permanent change in the approach of how organizations interact with their workers, that well-being became a critical part of who was a good employer and who was not. And we see this playing out in the market right now, where if you've heard the term the great resignation, whereas there's lots and lots of turnover in certain industries around the world. And in my opinion, it's because for the last year or 2 years, whatever it is, people were staring at their wall in their bedroom or at their kitchen table, and they were thinking. And they started to think about, is this the business I want to be on if they don't care about me? And so I think that the permanent change I would suggest that came out of the pandemic was that businesses acknowledge that well-being is a critical element of the reward offering, or the employee value proposition, if you will. I think that's one. The second one is that because we saw in the pandemic that we saw forced change of ways of working. So there was a lot more decision making that had to be fast and quick. There wasn't that if you were on Zoom calls all day long or Teams meetings, whatever you used, that things became much more efficient. And so we actually saw productivity increase during the pandemic. So I would connect that back to reward and say, well, when we think about the future of reward and the reward offering, how are you going to tap into what was good and carry it on? We used a term within Deloitte called, how do you bottle the brilliance? What did you learn from the pandemic that you want to carry on doing, and reward enables it or helps it or aligns to it? And what are those things you said, actually, we stopped doing and we don't need to do them anymore? They're not value add for our people or for the shareholder or for the business, whatever the case may be. And so again, I think that hopefully is a permanent change to reward, in terms of actually we're going to align with these outcomes, because when we enabled people to have a bit more freedom, productivity went up, and that is a good thing.
And speaking of productivity, is there a way to incorporate productivity-based pay into the skills-based reward that you talked about?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of you can connect, because if you think of pay and that kind of skills-based pay, that's on input. Because you don't know what the output is yet, you're willing to pay to say, I'm paying for that skill, it's an input. So the no part of my answer is that the outcome has to be determined by something that is not a set element component of the pay. So is it bonus? Is it something else? Is it a promotion? Whatever the case may be. And so it is, productivity is more related to the outcome. And so therefore, if you're going to reward productivity, you need to do that with some kind of variable pay. The reason being is because, well, what happens if you're not productive? You don't want to enforce that, well, you were rubbish, and so I'm still going to give you the same amount of money or same reward. So that's where you need that flexibility in the outcome, if you will.
Okay, just to speak to that, in addition to what Andrea said, so I'm totally aligned with that. It's a no, and yes, depending on how you look at it. But I think importantly, again, from a future reward perspective, and as you think through how this impacts, or delivers value for the business. So you need to think through, again, from the total perspective. So yes, even when you do a skills-based income, skills-based pay, you also need to begin to ask questions in terms of what you call the long-term value, right? Or short-term value, as it were. And then to say, how do I embed this in terms of my pay structure at the end of the day? And that's why we talk about, what they call it, the model that you want to build. So today it's, so if you had defined, what the outcome will be, like Andrew had said, so because, if you also step back and look at, when Andrew spoke earlier about workforce and the workplace, work is no longer an activity. Work means the outcomes, right? Now, when you begin to look at those outcomes and what those outcomes we deliver at the end of the day, and so you are, basically trying to first, motivate your people, ensure your pay it's personalized, and then on top of that, you're also saying, what does this mean from a value perspective? And that's where you could then have additional, structure to support, outcomes, and from a bonus perspective, from delivering of productivity. Don't forget that an assumption of productivity, in all honesty, when you're looking at certain skills to deliver, certain elements. So again, it's just being able to stretch that construct to arrive at, something that's a bit holistic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joseph. You talked a bit about maybe some disruptions, some limitations. I want us to look at it from the aspect of other microeconomic realities in our environment, right? All the contending forces at its way, cost of living, purchasing power reduction, currency devaluation, and its implications for employees. How do you situate future of reward in this mix? Because it looks like from where we sit, right, that's base pay and cash compensation, the reward part, even though Andrew said at some point that maybe we shouldn't focus so much on that because it's also, it's one of the common elements, but it's not the most important. But how do you situate this in view of all the issues around?
Okay, so thanks very much. Again, if I go back to Andrew's, so let me use that model, right? We thought of using just a single model. It's a single, as opposed to looking at multiple variables, so skill based, right? Now, if you even look at that, so the starting point is what is the base salary? Okay, before you then go to the skills, right? So the question is, how do you determine that base salary in the first instance? Is there an element? Don't forget that everyone, so let me put it this way. Assuming that we have 2 or 3 different models in our organization that we want to run. So maybe one for IT, maybe one for the other employees or whatever it is. So now the first thing is there is a base that goes to everyone. That's for instance, for sure. What is that base salary? What does it entail? How do you arrive at that base salary? If you think about the cost of living, if you think about, you don't think about the cost of living, you don't think about the other, inflation, do you think about what is happening from, how do you want to improve the standard of living? So there are a lot of things that we need to have gone into some of those, constructs, right? Before they begin to say, on the back of, in addition to that, there are other elements I want to reward. I want to reward you for the skills that are scarce that I do not have. So I think, the point is, in the future of reward, that will still come to play, right? But it's a function of how do we then factor some of these things, into our, pay. And like I said, if we take a simple example of from the base, what forms the base? Why is it the base, right? So once that is first, addressed, then we can then move to other elements of, okay, fine, I want to retain a particular talent. So where we talk about the talent investments, we talk about the well-being. So I think keeping it very simple, it is possible, it is doable, but let's start with the thought process of what goes into our base pay, right? Is it going to be living at cost of living, looking at, let me just say cost of living index, because again, I could then, if I unpack that cost of living, there's so many things I want to talk about at the end of the day. So I think basically that would be my view at this point, and then maybe I do want to also time in.
Yeah.
This is the hardest question. I saw earlier in the chat and I thought, please God, don't ask me. and I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way than you might expect. One of the things that I do is I have to do equal pay. And for a lot of countries around the world, equal pay is it's a legislative requirement. And I was doing a project for a global company, and one of the countries we were looking at was Pakistan. And so I interviewed I can't remember what the job was, head of HR, head the COO or something like that. And so we were trying to uncover, why is there a pay differential? What, why are men paid more than women? Help me understand. And for their culture, they were so focused on getting women into the office because they recognized the benefit of having an inclusive environment. But because of the very strict Muslim culture that, they needed permission of the husband or the father, whatever the case may be. And so my point is that we were looking at it from a very Western lens to say, why are you paying differently? And they were saying, we want women to work in the first place. Pay is a second event. Let's focus on what we can do. And I went back into my little Western box and I was embarrassed. And I was like, these poor people, not poor people, like, it's not for me to judge, but, their priority was very different than the rest of the company, global priority. I'm going to go back and I'm going to answer this question very directly because it is hard. If you're working in an environment of hyperinflation, currency devaluation, etc., would I start focusing on, let's talk to people about volunteering and everything? No, I wouldn't. I would focus on getting the basics correct and what you can do to support your people. However, with my future of reward lens, I would also say it's an investment for what will be coming. If you can talk to people about, I know you're struggling to pay to buy bread, or I know you're struggling to do this, and we're doing everything we can to address that. And you're transparent, which is a future of reward kind of concept. You're having regular conversations, you're explaining what you're trying to do. And at the same time, you're also saying, you're really important to me and I want to grow your skills. Is that not an investment towards the future when, please God, there is more stability, that hyperinflation starts to abate, and that there's more political stability in that region or in that country? And then what will that worker be for you in the future because you helped them and you were honest with them when nobody else was? So in that instance, I take it on the chin that you're not going to be talking about the elements of, like volunteer days or anything in this broader thing. I'm going to be talking to you about, how do I help you buy bread? But at the same time, you're a human and I'm going to treat you because I want to have a long relationship with you. And so in that, I would change the future of reward to say the balance of it, instead of it being that kind of, the market rewards, the really basic stuff, maybe in most organizations that don't have, or in countries where they don't face this, maybe it's 20% or 30% of the effort. And then it's 70 or 80% is on the motivator rewards. Maybe in those markets, I might swap it. Focus on the basics, but keep an eye towards the future and be honest with your people.
Fantastic summary there. So we have about 3 more questions. This question speaks to the issue of reward and performance. How do you balance it? So on the organization, from the organization perspective, right, where they're looking at restructuring, they're looking at cutting costs. At the same time, they want to drive the right performance. How do you balance it? Costs on one hand, and then high performance on the other hand.
Just another really hard one.
Interesting one.
So this is where I'd go. I would firmly embed myself in what Deloitte was presenting as the future of reward concepts, which is performance driven by this cash only, which is the cost cutting measure that you said, or is it driven by other things? So I would say actually it's driven by other things in that instance. In that case, maybe it's more, you have a job. And you're quite happy to have a job, and thank you, and what can I do to make sure I keep my job? Maybe that's part of the, and I don't mean that as the employer is the god and the worker is, the servant or the slave doing it. I don't mean it in that way. I mean more about actually what's the value of stability, and what's the value of having that conversation of what's coming next. And I think it's worth a lot, in my opinion. Second element with it, with cost cutting, is if there is still, even in organizations that are going through cost optimization, that's a Deloitte term for cost cutting, when you're focusing on cost optimization, usually there is still some element of discretion or recognition or something, cash or otherwise, that are given to people. So how do you reinforce the behaviors and the outcomes you want? It's not the manager's mate that's going to get it. It should be, how do you, and Joseph had said earlier, how are you using data to uncover who is actually the performer? And I will tell you, in most organizations, it is not those that are getting the biggest bonus. We do a lot of, I'm quite an analytics nerd, and we do a lot of modeling and stuff where we usually uncover in most organizations, the ones that are getting the biggest pay or the biggest rewards are not the ones that have the biggest outcomes. And so back to the question then, even in a cost optimization environment, there's still things to be given. I would just make sure you're giving them to the right people. And it's not the one with the big mouth or the one with the mate who's the manager. It will be someone different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. The next question actually speaks more to the future of work. And I know, Joseph, you've always been an advocate of implementing the future of work strategies to make our lives easier, as it were. So the question is, there seems to be a whole lot of hype around IT skills, IT roles. Does that mean that other professional skills will go into extinction?
Let me start by saying,
yeah, love that question.
Let me start by saying, I mean, it's an interesting question. Just what happened, at a particular session that I went to talk about the future of work, and the head of HR that might be in this room, I'm not sure, said, you know what, I can tell you guys that, apart from my job that will remain in HR, all your jobs will go. But unfortunately, it might sound somehow, but I think it's not. So let's try and look at it this way. So future of work is not about IT, really. Just the way we talk to organizations and say digital transformation is not about technology.
Sure.
It is about a way of doing business. It's about how you transform your business. Technology is just an enabler, right? And any job you're doing, any transformation, digital transformation that you're doing that is centered around technology will fail, because technology is not, it's just an enabler. It's about people, it's about human-centered, it's about how you do your things. So back to your question. So future of work is not, just the fact that there's a lot, or it's not about, technology. It's not about, there are jobs that we could, even jobs in technology that will disappear. That is the truth, on the back of future of work. Because when you talk about the second piece of the future of that puzzle, of that triangle, which is the workforce. Now the workforce here says, what kind of workforce do you require to do the work? And that comes first by you defining exactly what work is. And like I said, work is not activity, is not task. Work is more of outcomes, right? So once you define that, what that outcome should be, the question you're asking yourself is, who should be doing the work, right? Should it be done by a machine? Should it be done by people? Should I talk about, gig workers? Talk about the open talent economy that we talk about. Now, once we begin to look at this from that perspective, you will then realize that, in all honesty, there's some things that we do today that, whether in HR, whether it's in technology, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in operations, whether it's in, so whether it's banking, whether it is manufacturing, there are certain things that will go, clearly. And there's certain technology work that will also disappear, in terms of, view of the future of work. So I don't think it's something for us to be scared about. I think it's something for us to embrace, because there's certain benefit that comes with this. And one thing that we have said in Deloitte and I'm sure Andrew can speak to that as well, when we look at a global, some of the surveys we've done, the one thing that we've seen clearly is that for every work that is threatened or is vulnerable, you actually can create additional work. And one of the things that I tell people, especially for those in the banking sector, is I use the example of the ATM revolution. When the ATM revolution was going to happen, there was this belief that, people are going to lose their job, they're going to do X, Y, Z. But the reality is that when the 8th revolution came, it came with new set of skills, new set of jobs on the back of it. So I think answering that question straight is it's not about HR and it's not about technology. It's more than technology. It cuts across the entire organization. It is for us to be able to be honest with ourselves, being able to say, define, those three connected, dimensions of work. What is the work to be done? Who should do the work? And then where should the work be done? But more in terms of who should do the work is where this is where this question is talking about. So the work can be done by people. It can be done by machine. It can be done by robots. It all depends. Today we talk about virtual assistants, and that way it does a lot of things for me, for instance. So why do I need to kill myself doing those things when really something can do that work for me? But for us in HR, let's be honest with ourselves. 53% of our job really would go to automation. That is just for sure. If you look at our processes in HR, we have about 110, standard processes in HR. 53% of it will go to automation. And then we need to then figure out how we do the balance that is left. I don't know if I did answer or provide more. So Andrew, you want to chime in as well?
Sure. I have a very different perspective. So
okay, so
part of the not in a challenging way, just a different lens on the question. Part of the reason why we focus or like I presented IT skills is because that is a skill that is globally in demand, and it's
Absolutely.
very, very difficult for lots of organizations to get that kind of skill. So interestingly, in the last week, I had a conversation with Ford, the car company, and they're super keen on digital skills and how do we get them? And because of all the connectivity in a car with I'm like, Ford, that's not the kind of organization I would think of. A lot of banks, whereas they used to get the traders and the economists, that's what they wanted. Now they want digital people because that's how, people want the app or they want whatever the case may be. The customer experience needs to be better for, for asset managers, et cetera. So that's part of the reason we focus on it. Are other skills going out of fashion? No, not at all. I just think, so I'm doing something now with a global furniture manufacturer, global furniture company, and they're focusing on skills, and they're talking about what skills do we need for the people that work at the food counter in the shop. Is it customer service? Is it health and safety? These kind of things. So it is skills seems to be the new fuel for the future.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think they're just digital skills. Now, however, because everyone on this call, well, I assume everyone on this call is an HR professional. There's something in there about how do we get HR professionals to up their skills in areas they haven't traditionally had the skills. It used to be HR was excellent at the human side. I was soft, I was listening, I was empathetic. Now, most businesses need HR people who can run a model. I need to find out what's my head count? What's my workforce planning? What's my reward? And I need all those analytics. So even though those skills I wouldn't have traditionally put in HR, say 10 years ago, now I would say HR is really focused on that. Maybe not Python and SQL, but storytelling, data, analytics, some element of systems. So they're not the skills in HR, the empathy, the agility, the adaptability, those are still important. And they need to go into some of the other skills that we see are in demand for jobs around the world.
So let me just add to that, Andrew. So I get the point, and I totally align with that. I think the way I would describe this bit, more is whatever we do today can be categorized to three. Either is the work of the hand, the work of the head, or work of the mind, right? So, and regardless of where that sits, whether it's same question we just talked about, some example you gave. So if you look at account, for instance, or accounting, for instance, I've had the same conversation around what will happen, whatever it is. So we're leveraging on some of those, skills around data, excuse me, please. But I think the more important thing is we need to understand that for the things that works of the of the mind, right? It will stay. That's for sure, regardless of where it sits. whether it is, I mean, you know, of the heart, sorry, it will stay. But for that of the head, really, right, and that of the hand, there's a likelihood that, you know, what do you call it, you know, other machines will take over, and then we'll then need to figure out how that will happen. The other thing is the fact that today we're talking about having a more T-shaped employees as opposed to what we used to have prior to now. So, which means that you then need to have employees where, you know, your skill set is not just limited to a particular area, but also cut across, right? And just like Andrew said earlier, so you did mention an example in terms of, so I'm in performance, or I'm in reward, or I'm in career, and it's like we're all working as if we're different elements of, you know, in an organization, But the reality is that things are changing, where we need to say, how do we begin to think about a more flexible arrangement, where we collab, and that's where things around collaboration becomes quite critical going forward as a new skill that we need to think about.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. I have one more question for you, and then I have an additional question I would like Andrew to speak to on culture careers that he talked about. You know, what are they? Do you have examples on that you could share with us? But before then, to Joseph, there's a question on how do you take the lead as a team lead? That's one. The second part of that question, I've combined two questions into one, speaks to pushbacks. How do you handle pushbacks? You really want to implement some new initiatives, you want to restructure reward, you want to make it fit for purpose, but the board will have none of it. How do you handle such pushbacks?
You want my honest answer, you give up. All right. No,
Wow.
Yeah, you know, I this is a very, very, you know, important question, and again, I've seen that, you know, I'm sure NJ, you and I have experienced that a few times as well. But I think the truth is this. I thought I did speak to this earlier. First is we need to rethink, you know, this whole construct of reward. What exactly are we trying to do? And I think that's part of what Andrew was saying, in terms of being transparent and being fair. Number one. I don't want to say certain things on this call. Apologies, because I've seen organizations where we want to do this kind of, you know, reward change. And what I see is that, okay, you know what? We say let's start with the board first. Then let's go to the management. Then let's go to the staff. Now, you know, and what I found out is that seems to be an easy way to sell. So once the boards, you know, is done, and then we say the board we need to do for executive, they want to do for staff. That somewhat it gives a better path, or an easy, you know, perhaps, you know, makes the path a lot easier. But I think the more important thing is why. So let's ask ourselves, why is that pushback? I think that's the question we should be asking ourselves. Now, the reason why there'll be a pushback is because all the board sees most times is the cost. Okay, and back to what Andrew said earlier, traditionally we see reward as a cost. Okay, and I hear people say my wage bill is this high, you know, my salary cost is so much, you know, what's the total cost to company, right? What's the total cost to company, right? The issue, nobody's asking the question, what's the total value to the company? And I think that's where we miss the point. And that's where the things around data scientists or data analysis, you know, comes in. How do we, and this is not just about reward, it cuts across the different things that we do in HR. So how do we begin to move that or change that narrative where we're able to say, okay, fine, this is the total cost to company. What is the total value we're actually likely to derive on the back of this? It's not going to be an easy conversation. Let's not make it that simple. But it's a conversation we need to have. So it means that as you go to, so you can tell, you know, I mean, if you can tell your board, oh, XYZ company is doing this, they're doing that, and someone is going to tell you, oh, you know what? Oh, we're not the same company. Oh, we have a different challenge. Oh, you know, our balance sheet size is different. Oh, our top line is different. Oh, they have, I mean, I've heard all kind of manner of things. Oh, they have a lot of, we don't have, they are paying expatriates that much. We are not expatriates here. So, but the truth is, you know, we need to then say, I mean, we need to sit back and say, if we did A, B, C, D, G, we'll pay our people this. This is the kind of growth that we need to have. can we then begin to also structure to say, okay, you know what, we don't have to go the full org. Do we need to go start here and test this and see how it works? And then we can actually have a basis for us to say, let's move on to the next phase. Now, if you don't do that, I'm sure it will be a challenge. We continue to, because the board could, continue to ask that question, you know, why are we paying this much? The other thing again will also be the fact that we need to say, okay, you know what, okay, that's not a problem. When you say, so when you look at what is paid now and what again takes me back to when I say the long-term value, the short-term value, right? Are we be able to then begin to move things to more into the long-term, you know, and other things that we can, you know, actually quantify, we can measure, and they only get paid when those things happen, right? As opposed to it is fixed, you know, and they must be paid regardless of whether, you know, we drive our productivity or not. So I think it's all about how we drive, you know, that model, how we push things to the fact that, you know, people can, you know, relate with the outcomes of it, and then on the back of that, we can then disperse, you know, that, you know, sorry, in that at that point. But we must, you know, really work on that, you know, education, you know, share with the board a lot of data and statistics that they can work with, and please to be made, on a more honest view. There are times where there are meetings before meetings. I'm just being very honest here, you know, where there needs to be somebody heads that board. But I mean, I know there's some tough people, and I've seen that over and over. I've head that board, either, you know, remuneration committee or REMCO, whatever you call it, you know, whatever it is. Are there ways of actually having that side engagement to convince, to make them to understand before you go into the full room, into the room with everybody in the room? So that would be my view at this point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, the final question, it's on culture careers. Can you share examples, Andrew, even as we wrap up, maybe in the next 30 seconds?
Yeah, so just quickly, so cultural carriers, again, just to remind you, is that those are the elements that align with the culture or the purpose of the organization. So some examples are, so in Deloitte, Canada, if you saw on the news, Canada is really struggling with identifying or acknowledging some of the past related to how they treated Indigenous people. So what Deloitte did, there was a National Reconciliation Day in Canada. Deloitte Canada gave everyone in Deloitte an orange shirt, because orange was the color of this National Reconciliation Day. And on that day, everyone in Deloitte was required to wear the orange shirt, because it aligned with Deloitte's purpose and acknowledged that, you know, we've done not such good things, nice things in the past, but we're moving forward. Volunteer days is another really common one. So what do you do? How do you give people a little bit of time to work with their local church or with something else, because that's exactly what the purpose of the business is about. We also might see where there is a recognition scheme for the values that align to the business. So in one organization, there was a program called Limelight. And what they did is people could self-nominate their peers if they said, and there was like 4 or 5 values that it was tied to. And if people saw those people doing those values, they'd click on this little system, and then the person would get a, hey, well done, we noticed that you lived this value. So those kind of small programs, but that align human to purpose of the business in a real way.
All right, thank you very much. So that we're done with this session. You want to say something, Joseph?
Yeah, sorry, so I think, you know, again, just to, so I aligned, you know, with Andrew in terms of that, but I think what we need to start, you know, also thinking about is as we think through this process. So we've given, you know, some sort of, you know, an example in terms of using the skills. I think the whole idea is, you know, for us to start asking ourselves from what kind of values do you want to drive in our organization, and where does reward come to drive this value? You know, there's something we said earlier, you know, from an ESG perspective. I mean, there's a lot around, you know, what kind of organization we want to be. If you're talking about being a social, you know, organization, a social enterprise, right? You know, I mean, that's we started talking about that in the last 5 years, and we've seen more of that coming up. So what does that mean for us from a reward perspective? Yes, you may say it's as an impact perspective, but there's also the culture that drives that impact, as well. So how do we drive those values? How do we embed those into our reward? And most times we talk about it from our performance perspective, to say, oh, there's culture and values in our performance. But again, does it get rewarded? How does it get rewarded? And typically, what doesn't get rewarded doesn't get done in real sense of it. So how do we get to bring that in? How do we ensure that people, is it in terms of the kind of ideas that they come up with, right? And those ideas are actually rewarded as well. So these things are pretty much, like I said, and I'm going to use the word financial model earlier. I know what I was talking about, because, you need to have a model, maybe not a model, maybe a condition model, or what I'll call it, a reward optimization model, where you need to look at various elements, various variables, and you can actually look at different solutions, what can happen, what is to be done, and what shouldn't be done, and so on and so forth. So there's also that element of that I need to think about. So I think it's also important for, because I know people are also itching to hear this from a tax perspective. Some of the question earlier around tax. So one of our directors in tax and legal, she's done a lot in that space. Tolu will also, I think she can provide perspective, on that. Since Andrew and I are not tax experts, so maybe I can invite Tolu to provide some context.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Tolu, you can hear me. The question is around, do you foresee a global collaboration with tax authorities as skills and jobs become more global? So I can stay in Nigeria and work for a company in Switzerland.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. That question is a very interesting question, and honestly, we're beginning to move towards that. Already within the tax space, we are seeing the OECD roll out different regulations as to the impact of what is now the new normal, that we cannot run away from the fact that I am sitting in Canada, I'm working with a company in Nigeria or in Afghanistan. So it has come to stay, and rules and various regulations are being rolled out. Of course, even though these are being rolled out by the OECD, each jurisdiction, each country will still need to adopt or not adopt. For example, in Nigeria, we have signed the automatic exchange of information, and that means that we are able to, send in information about the workforce I have in Nigeria that may be seated in the UK. And so the UK tax authority may go after the person, even though he's working for me here in Nigeria, and so many other issues around that. Here in Nigeria, we are still not we are not fully signed up to some of course, we've signed on paper, but maybe in practice, we have not fully adopted most of these regulations or adopted it to our system. However, I won't want to take too much of our time here. We're having a webinar coming up very soon on the 1st of December. And let me use this opportunity to invite us to that webinar, where the focus is workforce mobility, taxation and regulatory consideration. And honestly, this is the time to have those conversations, because the year is running to an end. We need to file returns as HR directors and HR experts. We need to file returns with various jurisdictions. So not only within Nigeria. This is the time for us to start gathering information to really know where our workforce is sitting, because guess what? They might have created tax residency in those other places, even though their income is from Nigeria. But somebody is sitting in his own country in UK since COVID started. Definitely there are regulatory requirements and filing obligations even in those countries. We may never be able to come up with one single taxation, like you said, or harmonize the tax laws across the various jurisdictions we are in. However, there are cases for, treaties, double tax relief rules and all that. So we'll be unpacking a lot of that, especially as we move towards the end of the year. So let me use this opportunity to invite us for that session. Joseph and I actually had a discussion. We're thinking we could merge it, but it's a whole lot of conversation on its own. So please join us as we look at the taxation rules that may affect our workforce, as well as even the mobility rules, immigration rules, and all that, and what HR directors and practitioners need to be thinking about as we move towards the end of the year. So let me stop there and let that be a teaser for us to join our session on Wednesday, 1st of December by 9 a.m., where we'll be able to unpack all this and discuss. And let me just let you know that even at that session, you will have an opportunity of talking to the regulators. We are going to have someone from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, someone from the Nigerian Immigration Service, someone from Lagos State Internal Revenue Service, as well as tax experts and HR directors and experts. So please join us at that session and we'll be able to have a better deep dive into that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tolu. We've put up the flyer for that webinar, but you can also find it on all our social media handles. We'll send the link while sending the presentation deck for this particular webinar.
Thank you.
So thank you. So very quickly, we'll take a poll. I would like us to take our phones and go to mentee.com and type in this code. It's been an amazing session so far, and we are gradually coming to the end of it. Yes, Afiz, we'll send the link. I just saw your question. We'll send the link for the webinar while sending you the presentation decks. We'll use the email addresses you used in registering for this. If you didn't register or get any direct email from us, please send us your email address if you're on this call so that you'll be part of the communication. So let's go to www.mentee.com and type in this code. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code so you can participate. We have 2 questions that you respond to. Once we're done with one, we'll move to the other one. We'll close shortly after that if we don't have any other questions. Okay. The responses have started coming in. Andrew, why we wait to receive additional responses? What's your thoughts on employee well-being? The figures we are seeing with respect to employee well-being.
So interesting, what I see happening in the market is, especially over the pandemic, is a lot of the employee well-being element in strategy was by accident, not by design. It was very reactive for what was happening in the world. And I think what we see companies now saying is actually they acknowledge the importance of it and are pivoting to a more proactive structure and strategy for how they're dealing with employee well-being. And that goes from all the way from mental well-being to, like the chair I sit in, do I have good physical well-being? Here's another common one I hear companies talking about is how much does work invade your dreams? Which is a really interesting test, because does that reflect that you're stressed or that you're overworked or something like that, it's a really, really interesting one. I don't know how you would measure it. I'm definitely not telling my boss my dreams. But you see how, it's a good litmus test of how of the well-being and the balance you have in life.
Interesting. Joseph, this part on workforce flexibility, it's been static for a while. So it shows that we have more responses tilting towards no than yes. It actually aligns with what we've been discussing. What's your take?
Well, I think just to, sorry, before I stretch that. So I think to Andrew's point, what the way I summarize the well-being stuff, is the fact that at the entire pandemic and the aftermath, is that proud to that we all talk about being agile. I do know that in Nigeria, for instance, if you move from one company to another, especially in the financial services, we talk about being agile. Or wanted to be agile. In fact, it became like a buzzword, and in most of our strategy documents, you see we're agile in all we do, and so on, or agile transformation. But the reality is that with COVID, I think for the first time we're a bit agile, right? In the sense that we were building some of the planes while they were in the air, right? So we were reactive, but so we'll try this today, it fails, we try another thing, and kept building that workbook as opposed to a playbook. So I think that will continue. Yes, I think we've got a hold on some of those things now, and I think people are now going to be a bit more more proactive in terms of how they deal with this. And for me, what that also speaks to is that we need to ask ourselves that question. If we are not a family, what are we? Right? As an organization, and that's what that's actually going to be something that's coming up in another couple of weeks. We talk about the employer and the employee relationship being disrupted as we speak today, right? So really, we need to start thinking about it. Are we a family or we're not? And if we are a family, then well-being should be topmost, on our agenda and how we deal with this. Yes, and when we talk about reward, this is not about paying for it. Just like Andrew said, it's giving time off, being more conscious about people's well-being. Now we've been on this seminar. If this seminar was going to last for another 3 hours, we should break at about 2 hours and let people go and have some leg break and come back. Whatever break you want to call it, we give it a name. People today, we've had organizations saying, what, even though you're working from home, there's certain times you shouldn't even go to your email. And I know Deloitte has said that now, and it's part of our own hybrid of way of working, that once it is this time, please shut down your email, no matter what it is, right? So I think it's important that we start also thinking, about it. So there's a lot of thought process. But for me, this whole well-being requires some element of design thinking, right? Where we need to also engage people and understand what those things are, what those things are, and how we we help and how we support in this entire process. I think from the workforce flexibility perspective, so what we're trying to say here is that people are being mobile. I think it also speaks to what Tolu said earlier. So there's this mobility, you are here, you are there, and the question is that, how do we reward people? I know I recall Andrew saying an organization that's taking a position that regardless of where you work, you get paid the same thing. But I will tell you that that'll be a tough conversation, because someone will tell you, if I work in Nigeria or I work in Canada, is the cost of living the same thing? So there's going to be a lot of conversation around that. But the rest is that as an organization, we must take a position, right? In terms of what exactly we want to do. And that's why, to Andrew's point, we want to be careful as to how, I'm just for the right word now, when we develop our, philosophy on pay or on total reward, what do we put in that philosophy? Is it something that we can do? Is it something that we're not going to do, or something that we're going to struggle to do? So it's also important that we look at those things, and it's not going to be something that it's a function of looking at yes, good to look at what A has done, but what works for us, what works for our own people, what makes sense to our people, I think is important. And that's also what drives you from an EVP perspective. So it's going to be a challenge. So I'm not surprised that I'm seeing this kind of outcome. It shows that there's still a lot of thought process that needs to go to this. As we speak, we do have organizations that we're talking to on this. We're trying to unpack this for them. So I expect that this is going to be a lot of discussion. And that's why, for me, the whole idea, our reward optimization to begin to speak in a lot of these things. How do we ensure that we look at these various elements, what data is coming out of this element from our organization, and how do we deal with them?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. As you said,
Andrew just told me that he's happy to come to Nigeria to work, and he's going to get paid in Naira, right, Andrew? All right.
Okay, let's quickly move to the next poll. Let's quickly move to the next poll. I'll give a few more seconds to those that are yet to send in their responses. Okay, so this is the question. You have a different code for this, so same, just exit from the one you responded to, but you need to type in the code 1464168. Yeah, the responses are coming in. Thank you. I'll be very surprised if we have more more of one size fits all than personalized reward at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. I want to be careful here. Whoever was the company that said one size fits all, I can understand why you would want it. I'm doing something right now with Adecco. It's a global temporary agency where they provide manpower, temps, and they have so many brands and they're all over the place. To them to even get to a one global framework would be a massive transformation. And so they kind of, it's not really personalized reward they have now, but it's all over the place. There's no structure or anything. And so I can see why some people might say one size fits all is good for them, because it would be a huge step forward.
Sure, very true. Very true. Administratively will be a challenge. I think we spoke about this, in Deloitte back and forth, which is why for us, you begin to see. So if you look at a Unilever, I talk about the UX reward or something. Is if UX flex reward? I can't remember how it's captured. I think the reality is that, as you decide to you take a decision to go this journey. There are a couple of, a couple of, things that must be in place, and I think that's what, the question around limitation came in. There will be limitations, but again, those, like I said, at least are surmountable, but it will take some time, for it to be able to arrive at that, and that's why what I always say is that never start with a big bang approach, start somewhere, and that's the agile approach really, and then you can, correct as you go on.
So please let's send in our responses. Let's send in our responses. Same link, same code. Just choose either one size fits all or personalized reward. If you have the option to change your current reward system, what would it be? The number on the screen, the number of those that have completed, it's not up to 10% of the total people on the call. So please let's respond. We're actually coming to a close. You made a very valid point, Joseph, on the administrative aspects of this, because if we're working with a personalized reward, come to think of it, a personalized reward system, and people on the same grade level, they have the liberty to choose whatever they want. So somebody may say, I don't want HMO, or I want a gym facility, or I want an on-site crèche, or something. How do you balance it out? Andrew, how do you handle the administrative part of this? So
before Andrew responds, Andrew, just 1 second. I think before the administrative part, which is Andrew's bit, I think it's important to also say that you don't want to have too many, of this whatever it is. You need to be able to bundle them, right? You may have 1 or 2, 3 plans for you to pick from, and you need to do your own, what's the implication for you as a company, and then, so, that's why you have a value proposition at the end of the day. So I just think it was important to say that you don't need to have 1 million plans, just like Andrew was saying. You may all have 3, 4, it's just clear that you're not going to have everything fully, meeting 100% of my need. But I can tell you that if you're able to meet 70% of my need, I think there's a likelihood that I feel more recognized, I'm more motivated than when it's a case of take it or leave it. So Andrew.
So the answer is technology. Is that, it's not offering more choice to people doesn't mean more admin and effort, because there's quite good and cheap technology out there. So I started off my career in Aon Hewitt, where we did benefits outsourcing. And those contracts were worth hundreds of millions of dollars because it was so complex and you needed this big, heavy system to do it. And nowadays you can get them for like, I don't know, 2,000 euros or pounds or something, you know, like they're not very expensive. And so if a company has the ability to invest in something like that and the employee wants it, why not? You know, again, this goes back to what's the starting point? Is the starting point what's good for HR? Or is the starting point what's good for the employee?
For the people, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so sorry, Andrew, someone just said something. Sorry, and I know we need to close now, just comments. I just read someone's chat to say this could cause unhealthy competition, right? I mean, that's very, very true. But the same way, you know, the question is, what exactly do you want to achieve, right? So let me ask, does one size fit all today doesn't cause some level of unhealthy competition? Just like Andrew said earlier, oh, how much are you paid? How much do you get? So when people sit somewhere and say, you know what, but I know what I do, but I know what this person does. And there are certain skills in your organization, whether you like it or not, that will be critical, that, you know, you can't just find them on the road. It's just not possible. And the contribution is just somewhat disproportional in terms of what gets contributed to the bottom line. So I think we just need to be quite open about this, put the issues on the table and see how we address that. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I've said that a few times, but the reality is that we've seen organizations going in that direction today. And I can tell you that in our own market, right, we've seen a few organizations thinking about it because, and maybe that's where, you know, when Andrew spoke about the technology people, it's quite important. And we're seeing a lot of issues around that. And I'm seeing, just saying, you know what, for my guys in IT, can you have a different pay structure for them, right? You either have them or you don't have them. It's going to be either of those two.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Okay, as we wrap up, I just saw an additional question, though that has been answered. Someone wanted to know, how can you drive a personalized reward without a good HR or payroll software, which Andrew has tried to address as well. Then the question was, what better ways do we manage a situation where there is still a very high attrition, despite a very recent salary increase? Very interesting question. And to respond to that, would say that there are other factors, as Andrew said at the beginning, aside reward. It's not just reward. It's not just the take home or base pay, as Joseph graciously explained to us. So there are other factors. There's a recent project that we worked on, and we're looking at what other strategies, by compensation, my non-compensation strategies, that can actually drive retention. The organization was having a lot of issues around attrition, very high attrition, specifically for some skills, for some top skills. So the question was, what are the strategies they should be considering? So it was a full-blown project, and we considered lots of other factors aside reward. So very quickly, we'll move on as we close on this aspect of the webinar. Just to say thank you very much once again for coming. We'll send you the slides with the email that you registered with. This slide just provides a summary of our service offerings, which we've pretty much talked about. With respect to digital HR and employee experience, HR strategy, Oracle HR payroll, SAP success factors, student technology and transformation, Workday HR. We actually dimension our human capital offerings into 3 distinct buckets, which is the HR transformation, the org transformation, and the workforce transformation. Today, we focused on the rewards and well-being, which is an aspect of the workforce transformation. If you have any other questions, please email them to us and we'll gladly respond to them. We are not doing very well on time, so we need to close at this point. I'll allow Joseph to give a vote of thanks, and then we can close. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the participants on this webinar. I think your questions are quite, also able for us to be able to provide more insight. Are quite, very good questions, interesting questions. And I think I will share we're quite available to provide additional support. So thank you very much to all of you. I mean, it's early in the day. Interestingly, myself and Andrew, could be myself, it's about 2 a.m. Okay, where I am, it's about 2 a.m. But it's fine that we can go through this. Just shows how important this is. For Andrew, also say, Andrew, thank you very much, for your time as well, being able for us to go through this. Same for Tolu, same for Njideka and the entire team. So to everyone, once again, that made that time to join this, thank you very much. And we really do look forward to having further conversation with you on this particular topic, because it's not going to end here. And that's the reality. There's so much that we still need to do on the back of this. And like Njideka said, if you do have additional questions, feel free to share your questions with us. If you want us to have a closed door session with you, happy to do that. I mean, there's something we can share on this call, but again, happy to share, when we have those closed door one-on-one sessions with you. So thank you once again. And I want to wish you a happy Thursday. Let me use that word. It's too early to say, happy weekend, because weekend doesn't start until tomorrow. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.